Hi kids, Pastor Josh here again with another Bible story for you. Now if you remember, our story last time was in the city of Athens. Now, Paul did what he could there, though some of the people were kind of stubborn. And then he decided it was time to move on to the next city. So he moved to the city of Corinth. And some pretty big things happened to Paul while he was there. First thing was he met a new couple named Aquila, which for the record is a boy's name, and Priscilla. They were Jews that had just left the city of Rome, and they were tent makers by trade, which as it happens, so was Paul. That's how Paul made his living, at least when he would need to make money so that he could still go around on his missionary travels. So he became friends with these two, possibly even business partners. And because of the friendship that these two had with Paul, they would become Christians. More than that, they would become leaders in the church. Now, Paul worked part-time in the tent shop and part-time as a missionary until Timothy and Silas finally caught up with him. When his friends and fellow missionaries finally got back, he decided it was time to go back to full-time missionary work. So he went to the local synagogue and he started teaching about Jesus there. He had mixed results, to say the least. There was a handful of people that listened and wanted to become Christians, but there were some really stubborn folk in the Corinthian synagogue. The fact is, it got so bad that they started hurling insults. I mean, Paul had pretty thick skin. He didn't mind if someone was going to make fun of him. What he took issue with, though, was that these people were starting to shout insults about Jesus and the mission. That's what Paul couldn't take. Finally, what it came to is Paul said, "That's it. I've had it. Insult me all you want, but don't insult my God. This is the last you guys are going to see of me here. Whatever happens to you, it's on your own head. If you want to see me, I'll be somewhere else." And so Paul left the synagogue, and he went next door to the house of a Greek Christian. And there, he kind of started up his own synagogue, a place where he could teach people about Jesus without having to worry about these other people throwing abuse. Now, some of the people from the synagogue did follow after Paul to continue to listen. The leader of the synagogue even came to become a Christian. Not too long after that, Paul goes to bed one night and he has a dream. Jesus himself comes to Paul and says, "Keep up the good work. Don't be afraid to continue teaching people about me." So Paul gets up the next morning and he seems to think that what Jesus is telling him is that he's got to stay right where he is in Corinth. For a while anyways. So Paul stays and teaches people about Jesus in Corinth for 1.5 years. That's a long time for Paul to be in just this one spot. But then, something crazy happens. Remember those people that were throwing insults at Paul in the synagogue? Apparently they reached their boiling point or something, because one day they grab Paul and take him before the proconsul. That's basically a fancy word meaning the governor of the area that Corinth is in. So they bring Paul before the proconsul and say, "This man is teaching customs that it's not right for Jews like us to follow." Now Paul goes to defend himself, but before he even has a chance to do so, the proconsul says, "Get out of here! This has nothing to do with Roman law. I'm not going to waste my time with this." And so Paul gets to go free, plain and simple. So Paul does feel that at this point, it is time to move on. But when he leaves, some of the people he leaves in charge are Priscilla and Aquila. Not too long after Paul leaves, these two meet someone else, a Greek man named Apollos. Just like Paul had befriended them, they befriend Apollos, and they're able to lead him to Jesus. And not only that, but Apollos, he also goes on to be a leader in the church and one of the best missionaries that the early church had. We have, from the writings in the Bible, we know that Apollos was one of the best missionaries in the church, put on the same level as Paul and Peter themselves. Nobody who tried to argue with Apollos about Jesus ever won their debate. And all of that came just because Paul shared Jesus with someone else. Now that's where our story ends for today, but we got a couple of very important lessons to learn here. The first is, sometimes you just gotta give stubborn people some space. Just like Paul did with the Corinthian synagogue. Probably would not have been his first choice just to say, I've had it with you. But they were just so stubborn that they wouldn't listen. And so Paul decided it was best to give them some space to try to think things over. So when we come across someone stubborn who won't listen about Jesus, sometimes that's the best thing we can do. But just like some people would go from the synagogue to Paul to learn more, sometimes when we give people that space, God works in them and they'll come to find out more later. And maybe it won't be from you that they ask, but you've planted the seed. You've done what God's asked you to do. And the second important lesson is to never be afraid to teach people about Jesus. Because when you do what God asks, He's going to use your efforts to their best possible effect. When Paul first got to the city, he made friends with a simple couple that worked as tent makers. But because of his work with these two people, the church got two new leaders. And they would go on to teach someone else that would be one of the best missionaries the church has ever known. Might not happen exactly that same way for you, but when God asks you to share Him and you do that, He's going to put your efforts to their best possible effect.